There are 12 tribes of Israel. You have heard that your entire life. Genesis names 12 sons. The tribes are listed in Revelation. 12 gates, 12 foundations. The number is everywhere, and it is not an accident. But here is what almost no one has ever been told. If you pull out a concordance and look up the actual tribal lists in the Bible, the ones used for land, for armies, for inheritance, Joseph's name is missing. Not shortened, not symbolic, gone, replaced. And in his place, two names appear that are not among the original 12 sons at all. If you have read your Bible cover to cover and never noticed this, you are not alone. Most pastors never explain it. Most Sunday school curricula skip it entirely. But by the end of this video, you will know exactly why Joseph's name was removed, what it was replaced with, and what that substitution reveals about how God chose to honor one man above all his brothers, in a way that has everything to do with a prophecy most people read right past. To understand what happened to Joseph, you have to go back to the moment the 12 sons were born. Jacob, the patriarch whose name was changed to Israel, had 12 sons by 4 women. The names are familiar: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. 12 sons, the foundation of a nation. But here is the detail most readers glide past without stopping. These 12 sons did not become 12 tribes in any simple, one-to-one way. When the time came to divide the land of Canaan, the tribe of Levi received no territorial inheritance at all. The Levites were consecrated to the priesthood, set apart to serve at the altar, supported by the tithes of the other tribes, scattered among the cities rather than rooted in a single territory. The moment Levi stepped out of the land system, the count dropped to 11. 11 is not a biblical number. It carries no symbolic weight. So something had to fill the gap. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. The solution was not to redistribute territory among the remaining 11. The solution was to split Joseph's inheritance and give it to his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as if they were original sons of Jacob themselves. 2 grandsons, elevated to the status of founding tribes. That is not a minor administrative adjustment. That is an extraordinary act. So here is the question worth holding. Why would Jacob single out Joseph's sons and not the sons of any other tribe for this kind of elevation? We will come back to exactly why. And when we do, it is going to reframe everything you learn between now and then. For now, hold that question. The standard answer you will hear is practical. Joseph received a double portion because he was the favored son, the one who saved Egypt and Israel from famine, the one whose brothers sold into slavery. And that is true as far as it goes. In the ancient Near East, a double portion was the birthright inheritance, the portion owed to the firstborn. Joseph got it because Reuben, the actual firstborn, had forfeited his claim. Genesis 49, 3-4 records Jacob's devastating verdict on Reuben directly. Turbulent as water, you will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed. The birthright passed, and it passed to Joseph. But here is the irony that gets lost in that explanation. Reuben lost his birthright for one act. Joseph earned his for a lifetime of faithfulness, under conditions that would have broken almost anyone. Sold by his own brothers. Enslaved in a foreign country. Falsely accused. Imprisoned. And at every stage the text records the same phrase. The Lord was with Joseph. Not that Joseph was lucky. Not that Joseph was clever. That the Lord was with him. So Joseph receives the double portion. His 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, become tribes. The count returns to 12. Problem solved. Except it is not solved. because that answer still does not explain why Joseph himself disappears from the list. A double portion does not require erasure. You could simply list Joseph twice, or list him once and note his sons. But that is not what happens. Joseph's name drops out entirely, and Ephraim and Manasseh stand in his place as if they had always been there. And that connects directly back to the question I left open. Why elevate the grandsons specifically, and not just honor Joseph within the existing structure? Stay with me, because what Genesis 48 actually records is going to reframe everything you thought you understood about this substitution. And here is where the question I planted earlier finally lands. Genesis 48 is one of the most remarkable and most overlooked chapters in the entire Torah. Jacob is dying. Joseph brings his two sons, Manasseh, the eldest, and Ephraim, the younger, to receive their grandfather's blessing. What happens next is deliberate and strange. Jacob crosses his arms. He places his right hand, the hand of primary blessing, on Ephraim, the younger son, his left hand on Manasseh, the elder. Joseph tries to correct him. He physically reaches out to switch his father's hands, and Jacob refuses. "I know, my son. I know," he says in Genesis 48:19. "He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a fullness of nations." Picture that room for a moment. The old man, nearly blind, lying in a dim Egyptian chamber, his son leaning over him, trying to guide his hands, and Jacob holding firm, crossing his arms, insisting on something Joseph cannot see yet. This is the third time in Genesis that the younger son receives the greater blessing over the elder. Abel over Cain, Jacob over Esau, now Ephraim over Manasseh. The pattern is not accidental, it is theological. The biblical narrative is making an argument about how God operates, not through the expected line, but through the chosen one. But here is the piece most readers miss entirely, and this is where the reframe clicks into place. When Jacob adopts Ephraim and Manasseh as his own sons in Genesis 48:5, he says something extraordinary. "They will be reckoned as mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine." He is not giving Joseph a double portion in the ordinary sense. He is pulling Joseph's sons up a generation. He is making them his own children. And in doing so, he is effectively immortalizing Joseph at the founding level of Israel itself. Joseph does not disappear from the tribal list. Joseph is elevated above it. He becomes the only son of Jacob whose legacy is carried forward not as one tribe, but as two, Ephraim and Manasseh, both bearing his inheritance, both present every time the tribal structure is named. What looked like erasure is actually the opposite. It is the highest honor in the entire system, and it changes the meaning of every tribal list you have ever read. What strikes me about this is that the Bible does not announce it. It does not say, "This is the greatest honor." It records the act quietly, in a single deathbed conversation, and trusts the reader to understand what just happened. That restraint is part of the theological argument. The elevation is real precisely because it does not need to be declared. It is simply done. Here is why this matters for anyone reading their Bible in America today, and especially for anyone watching what is happening in the Middle East right now. The tribal system Jacob established is not just ancient history. It is the architecture underneath prophecy. When Revelation 7 lists the 144,000 sealed from the tribes of Israel, it uses a modified tribal list, and it also omits Joseph by name while including both Manasseh and a version of the full inheritance structure. Students of end times prophecy have wrestled with that list for centuries, asking why it differs from the Old Testament lists. The answer begins here, in Genesis 48. And for anyone who has spent decades reading the Old Testament and feeling like the tribal structure is a confusing tangle of names, this reframe matters personally. Joseph's story is not just the story of a favored son who survived hardship. It is the story of a man whose faithfulness was honored by God in a way that outlasted every trial, every betrayal, every year in prison. His name does not appear on the inheritance list because he is above the list. His sons carry his legacy forward in every generation the text names them. If you have ever felt overlooked, erased, or pushed to the side by people who should have protected you, the story of what Jacob did in that Egyptian room is worth reading again. Slowly. So Jacob had 12 sons. The tribes of Israel number 12. And Joseph's name is missing from the land records, the army census, and the inheritance rolls. Not because he was forgotten, but because he was placed in a category the tribal system was not built to contain. Ephraim and Manasseh stand in his place. 2 grandsons elevated to the rank of founding sons. A double portion that was never really about land at all. It was about legacy, and about a father who understood, even at the end of his life, that some acts of faithfulness are too large for a single inheritance to hold. This is the part I keep coming back to. The Bible records Joseph's elevation without fanfare. No trumpet, no declaration. Just an old man crossing his arms in a dim room, and a son who did not yet understand what he was witnessing. Remember the question I planted at the beginning. Why does Joseph's name vanish from the list of tribes? Now you know the answer. It vanishes because it was replaced with something larger. 2 names instead of 1. A legacy that branches instead of ending. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Of all the sons of Jacob, Joseph is the one whose story most resembles a later story. A faithful son, rejected by his brothers, sold for pieces of silver, condemned unjustly, and then raised to a position of authority that saves the people who betrayed him. Whether that parallel is typology, prophecy, or pattern, I'd love to know what you think. Leave it in the comments.